Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah. Before I begin, I'm going to apologize for my voice. Those who know me, this is not how I sound. Been suffering from a medical condition of the throat, and I tell people the doctor has already seen me. Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim, alhamdulillah, wassalatu wassalamu ala Rasulillah, wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa man wala amma ba'd. Rabbi shrah li sadri wa yassir li amri wa hlul uqdatan min lisani yafqahu qawli. You know, I believe when we're given topics or we select passages of the Quran to teach for those of us involved in da'wah, we don't choose our topics and we don't choose those passages of the Quran, rather they choose us. Really, the topics, the verses of the Quran, those of us engaged in teaching hadith from the Prophet alayhi salatu wassalam, they choose us. I spent the last few weeks talking in different communities about what I believe can be the game changer for Muslims, not only in this country but around the world. And that is the very important advice from the Messenger of Allah alayhi salatu wassalam, as narrated by Abu Huraira and related by Imam Muslim in his Sahih, where the Prophet said, Al-mu'minul qawi khayrun wa ahabbu ila Allahi min al-mu'minid da'if wa fi kullin khayr. The Prophet said a strong believer is better and more beloved to Allah than a weaker believer, while there is good in both. When you look around the Muslim world today and look at Muslims any place in the world, the last thing you think of is strength. When you look at the Muslim nations and how they're being treated by their governments and how Muslims are being massacred by the thousands in some of these regions, may Allah preserve them and save them, the last thing you think of is strength. When you look at a Muslim people that represent or that happen to be the most disenfranchised people on the face of this earth, people who have no rights compared to every other nation in the world, and I'm talking about none other than our brothers and sisters from Palestine. When you look at what's happening with them and no one has the courage to stand up and speak on their behalf, rather people who are dedicated to destroying their lives and taking their rights away, they come to this country, they're given standing ovations and so on and so forth. The last thing you think of is strength. When you look at how we deal with our own nation here, deals with many Muslims around the world, where we can go in and target anyone for assassination, drop a bomb on any house that we want, going into any house and shoot someone in the head, and we call it justice. The last thing we think of is strength. And when you look at our situation in this country, how politician after politician is making a career out of themselves, for themselves, at our expense, the last thing you think of is strength. But it's precisely in these times that we need this lesson from the Prophet ﷺ, who encouraged strength, who encouraged us to be strong believers in all of his dimensions. How does that relate to the topic? When I was given this topic about a week and a half ago, as the organizers usually do, they give us about a week notice, sometimes 2 weeks if you're lucky. They gave me a topic. Had they asked me about the topic, I would have chosen this topic. That's why I said the topic chooses us. Because no one represents strength in our ummah more than this individual, Amir al-Mu'mineen Abu Hafs, Umar ibn al Khattab, ibn Nufayl al-Qurashi al-Adawi, radiyallahu anhu wa ardah. No one represents strength in our ummah more than Umar ibn al Khattab, may Allah be pleased with him. His life was an embodiment of strength and courage. In fact, the Prophet ﷺ, when he looked at him, he recognized his strength even when he was an enemy to Islam. And he made a supplication. How many of us know that? Before Umar became Muslim, the Prophet made dua for him. He said, Allahumma أعز الإسلام بعمر ibn al Khattab. O Allah, give strength to Islam through Umar ibn al Khattab. And then he came into Islam with his strength. The Prophet recognized that strength, and he brought that strength into Islam. And when Umar became Muslim, his shahada was a game changer for the Muslims. When he became Muslim, things began to change. Muslims came out of hiding. For the first time, they made salah in the haram. And we read the stories of how he came into Islam. It's remarkable. When he became Muslim, he asked around. Muslims were hiding. He asked the Prophet, aren't we on the truth? Why are we hiding? We don't deserve to hide. And the Prophet agreed with him, and they decided that the history changed. They came out from hiding. So he went out and he asked the people, if I want to get some news out, who do I talk to? Who's the person with the biggest mouth if I want to spread some news? And they gave him a particular name, Jamil ibn Muammar al-Juhani. And he found this man and he said, guess what? I'm Muslim. And immediately the news began to spread. Not only that, he went to the Haram, to the Kaaba, and he announced at the top of his lungs, Umar ibn al Khattab is Muslim, and he led a group of people with him. And as soon as people heard, and he said, I am Muslim now, do what you want. They pounced upon him, and it was a rumble. It was WrestleMania. And they started fighting for hours until they came out strong, and they earned the right to worship with this show of strength. They earned the right to make salah in the Haram. Not only that, he went around and he asked who were the biggest enemies of Islam, and he went to their houses. So he knocked on the house of Abu Sufyan, and Islam entered a whole new phase of existence. So Ibn Mas'ud radiyallahu anh, he said, "Ma zilna a'izzatan mundu aslama Umar." We kept getting stronger and stronger from the time Umar radiyallahu anh, he embraced Islam. So that was Umar radiyallahu anh, may Allah be pleased with him. But despite his strength, what kind of strength was it? Was it a strength that made him arrogant? Was it just a physical strength? No. But at the same time, he was strong, and people feared him, yet he lived a life that didn't look like a life of a person who's strong and mighty. One of the poets said it best. He said, Ya man ra'a Umaran taksuhu biriddatihi والزيت أدم له والقوخ مأواه يهتز كسرى على كرسيه فرقا من بأسه وملوك الروم تخشاه. He said, oh, who has seen Umar radiallahu an wrapped in a simple cloth? His food was oil, and a cottage, a hut was his house. But at the time, the emperor of Persia, he used to shake in his chair from fear of his retribution. And even the kings of Rome, the emperors of Rome, used to fear him. That was Umar ibn al Khattab radiallahu an. Now, how much can you talk about a person like that? You can spend hours, you can spend days speaking about his legacy. But I wanted to share 3 points from his life with lessons for our time. I wanted to look at his commitment to justice. And I wanted to look at his economics. And I wanted to look at his commitment to shura, or respecting the will of the people. So one of the things, Umar radiallahu anh, he was a strong person, but one of the things that guided him was a profound sense of justice. Now, most people don't realize, how did he come to Islam? We all know the well-known story of when he visited his sister. But how many of us know an interaction he had with some women of Quraysh? You know, Muslims were leaving Mecca to make the migration to Abyssinia because they were persecuted and they had no choice. So one day he met a group of women. They were leaving Mecca, their bags packed. And one of them was Abdullah bint Hantama. And he happened to see them in the road, and he said, where are you going? And they said to him, or she said to him, you know, you have driven us out of our lands. You don't let us practice our religion. We're leaving this place until Allah makes a way for us and we come back. Umar radiallahu anhu, he was silent, and he said, Sahibakumullah, may Allah be with you. And Abdullah, she said she saw a kindness in Umar, the likes of which she never saw before. And when she told the story to someone later on, and Umar, he was famous for being a staunch opponent of Islam. That person sarcastically, he said, you know what? إِنَّهُ لَا يُسْلِمْ حَتَّى يُسْلِمْ حِمَارُ عُمَرُ. You know, the donkey of Umar will become Muslim before Umar becomes Muslim. That's the reputation he had. But that was one of the points in his life where he began, thinking about things. And then we know the well-known story. What was it that motivated him? What was it that changed his heart? It was a sense of justice. Seeing women leaving their homes, being driven out for their religion. Really, that made him think. And then when he went to his sister's house, the more famous story that we heard, he went out to kill the Messenger of Allah, alayhi salatu wassalam, and they directed him to go to his sister's house. And he went there and they had another rumble and a brawl. And then his sister started bleeding. Then when he saw the blood on his sister's face, immediately he was transformed. It was his sense of justice. And he looked at her, he said, "What are you reading?" And then eventually she gave him the pages from Quran. It was Surah Taha. And he began to read those verses and he was transformed. And then he became Muslim. He went to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wasallam and he embraced Islam. And the story began. So Umar radiallahu anh, the point being, he was guided by a profound sense of justice. That's what made him who he was. And that's what he brought with him to the khilafah. When he became the governor after Abu Bakr, he brought with him this justice. And that's what made him so legendary and made him so popular. So many things can be said about him, but one of the first things he did when he became governor, he set a system of accountabilities. We all know the famous quote from Umar ibn al Khattab, حاسبوا أنفسكم قبل أن تحاسبوا وزنوا أنفسكم قبل أن توزنوا. Take yourself to account before you are taken to account, and weigh yourselves before you are weighed on the day of judgment. How many of us know he said those in his inaugural address? When he became the Khalifa, one of the first things he said was that. And then he set up a system. Not only he talked the talk, but he walked the walk. He set up a system of justice and accountability. So he would set up these town hall meetings. He was perhaps the first one in history to do that. He would set up these meetings with the public, with his governors at present, and he would talk to them. And then he would ask them in these meetings, is anyone who has been wronged in any way by my governors or anyone from my estate? And he would ask them. And in fact, one of these first meetings, a man stood up and he said, yes, I have been wronged. One of your governors, he gave me 100 lashes. Umar radiallahu anh, he called that governor and he said, what are you doing this for? And he said, settle the score. And when he said that, this is the first time he did that, it was so momentous that Umar ibn al-As, one of his other governors, he stood up and he said, oh Umar, if you let this happen, you're going to set a precedent and things are going to get out of control. In other words, he was a pragmatist. What was he saying? He was saying, if you establish things like this, imagine what's going to happen with the people. And when you look around the world today, whenever something bad happens or there are abuses of power from people in authority, what are the first things they do? Things like Abu Ghraib in our nation and all across the world, they try to hide those things and they try to do damage control. What they do, they try to settle these things before they get out of control, before they become public. But this was Umar ibn al Khattab. He said to Umar, he said, shall I not establish justice when someone better than you and I, the Messenger of Allah, alayhi salatu wassalam, he allowed people to settle scores with him. So he made them work out a compensation, and that consisted of giving 200 dinars to this person, 2 dinars for every whip that he received. That was Umar ibn al Khattab. And his justice didn't just extend to Muslims, it extended to non-Muslims. How many times did he rule in favor of non-Muslims, Jews and Christians, against Muslims? We know the famous story, Amr ibn al-As, the governor of Egypt. His son was in a race with one of the Coptic indigenous people of Egypt. And that person beat his son in a race. So the son of this governor, he's the son of the ruler, the governor in that region, he began to beat him. And this man, eventually he found his way to Medina and he complained to Umar ibn al Khattab. What did Umar do? He called Umar ibn al-As and his son and he asked him about it in public. And when he realized what happened, he told the Coptic person, the Egyptian, to take your revenge on the son, and he hit him back until he was satisfied. Not only that, he said, hit his father, Amr ibn al-As. because he allowed that to happen. And he said the words he used were quite harsh. Hit him on his bald head. That's what he said, the words he used. And the man, he said, no, I have no beef with him. It was just his son. He didn't even know about it. And then he says some golden words. Really, these are the words that inspire people today. And what's happening across the Middle East is a result of this teaching. He said, Ya Umar, he said to Umar, Mata ista'badtumun nas wa qad waladathum ummahatuhum ahrara. He said, oh Umar, when did you enslave the people? When their mothers bore them free. Since when did you enslave people when they were born free from their mothers? That was Umar ibn al Khattab. Now these were revolutionary teachings. Not everyone got these teachings. There's an interesting story of a man, Jabala ibn al Haytham, who was one of the leaders of the Ghassanid tribe in the north of Arabia. This was a Christian tribe that was always fighting the Muslims, involved in intrigue, because it bordered with Byzantines, so it was always involved. They were always involved with the Byzantines against the Muslims. So the leader of this tribe, he embraced Islam. And he came to Medina, and there was a celebration. Umar was quite happy. This is a region that's known for trouble and turmoil. And this man, he embraced Islam, so he came to Medina, and they gave him a celebrity welcome. And he was making the Hajj or Umrah, he was making tawaf around the house. And one of the Bedouins accidentally stepped on his cloak, and it fell from his shoulders. So this leader, what he did, he punched this Bedouin in the face and he broke his nose. And eventually Umar radiallahu anh, he found out. And he called this leader Jabala, and he called the Bedouin. And he demanded to know what happened. And what was the response of this leader? He said, oh Umar, had it not been for the sanctity of this house, I would have chopped off his head. I would have done much worse. So Umar radiallahu anh, he said, no, we're going to get revenge. We have to establish the qisas. Either you settle it with him, or we're going to establish the qisas. This leader, Jabala, he was astounded. He couldn't understand what was happening. And finally he said, wait a minute. I'm a king. He's a common person. What are you talking about? How can that be? And Umar radiallahu anh, he said, Innal Islam qad sawwa baynakuma. Verily Islam made you equal. There's no king, there's no commoner, everyone's equal. And he said, reconcile with him. So Jabala, at the end, he said, look, give me some time, let me think about it. And Umar gave him time. What did he do? He ran away, and he went to Constantinople, and he embraced Christianity again. He just couldn't take it. So the point is, this was the justice of Umar radiallahu anh. A lot of people weren't ready. And Umar, he let this person go outside of Islam, but he wouldn't violate the tenets of justice. That was the justice of Umar ibn al Khattab radiallahu ta'ala an. And it's precisely that reason where the lands that Umar radiallahu an won for Islam, they remained Islam till the end. You don't have any examples of conquest done in the time of Umar because of his justice that went back. Although there are many examples in other times where Muslims conquer lands and other people conquer them back. But the lands, what are the lands that Umar radiallahu anh, he presided over? Syria, you had Egypt, you had Iraq, and you had Persia or Iran. These nations are staunchly Muslim nations today, more than 90% Muslim population. And they're heartlands and cultural centers of the Muslim world to this day. Why is that? Because of Umar radiallahu anh, because of the justice that he established. Now moving on to his economics. Time is running out, but the economics of Umar. We live in a world where people are suffering economically. In this nation and all across the world. We live in a world where people are being crippled by governments, over taxation, burdening. And we find governments and rulers across the world getting rich at the people's expense. So in the realm of economics, what Umar radiallahu anh, he established, really could change the situation of mankind. It's something that the world badly needs. One of the first things he did when he became Khalifa, and one of the things that he established was the Islamic State in the time of Umar radiallahu anh, it gave the people much more than it took from them. The Islamic State gave the people much more than it took from them. So it wasn't just about taxing the people and getting rich and establishing institutions, but rather they gave out money to the people. So Umar radiallahu anhu, when he became Khalifa, one of the first things he did, and he said to them, he reminded them that I'm not here to take your money. I'm not here to get rich off you. I'm here to establish justice. And if I take anything from you, I will only use it for proper means. And if I don't use it, I'll give it back. So he established these parameters. And he told them the government is for the people. And it wasn't about getting rich off the people. And one of the things he established was giving money to everyone called a stipend. So when government was rich and they were well off, he would distribute that money to the people. That was one of the functions of government in the time of Umar radiallahu ta'ala an. Now, he would call these town hall meetings. In one of these meetings, he reminded them, "Oh people, I do not send my agents to you to beat you or to take your money, but rather I send them to you to protect you from any injustice and to divide the wealth among you." And he would ask for accountability. We know the famous instance where he returned jizya to a region. He gave all the people their taxes back. They were non-Muslim. And he said, "Look, we can't take care of you anymore. Our government can't do its job. So here's all your money back that we collected from you." Can you imagine any government in the world doing that today? Can you imagine Muslim or non-Muslim giving people money, actually giving them back? No. Now, ending with the salary of Umar ibn al Khattab radiallahu an. The issue of a salary for a head of state. You know, when you look around the world today and you look at the numbers of how much the heads of state they earn, it's astounding, it's nauseating. Especially the Muslim world, it's in the millions and billions. We know Mubarak is on the headlines today even. You know how many billions he earned while being president. And the same for every nation in the world. These heads of state, they live off the people. And they build these pockets of wealth and they build these empires. And our nation here in America is no different. You know how much the presidential salary is? It's $400,000. And the sad thing is that's not even considered a lot. Nobody complains about that number. Because everyone knows, and the presidents themselves, they admit, that's chump change because what we earn on the side is much more than the salary that we get. So every president in our history has earned millions and even perhaps billions of dollars on the side in book signings, book deals, and contracts and consultations. It's a very corrupt system. You know Bill Clinton, how much he earns for one single speech? You know, we're giving speeches here, we don't get a dime. Omar Suleiman can tell you that. We don't get anything. Bill Clinton, for one speech, he earns between $125,000 to $325,000. We're not talking about $100. $125,000 to $325,000 because he was a head of state. So these are the numbers we're dealing with. Umar ibn al Khattab, when he became Khalifa, for a period of time, he didn't earn anything. He didn't earn anything. And then when he realized his business was suffering and he was preoccupied with the Muslim world on a full-time basis, he realized something had to happen. So he called consultation from all of his companions and he asked them, what should we do? So he consulted Uthman and Ali, and after much deliberations, he decided on something. And he announced to the people, what did he decide on? That I would be entitled to one piece of transportation, a riding beast to take me to Hajj and Umrah, one pair of clothes for the winter, one pair of clothes for the summer, food for my children, one meal a day, and just the average stipend, what every other Muslim in the Islamic State gets. This was Umar radiallahu ta'ala an. It was about giving back to the people. And to all the people who defend monarchies in the Muslim world, they should hear Umar ibn al Khattab. He asked Salman al-Farisi, he asked him, "Am malikun ana am khalifa?" He said, am I a king or a khalifa? And Salman, he said to him, he said, "In anta jabayta min ard al-muslimin dirhaman aw aqal aw akthar ثم وضعته في غير حقه فأنت ملك غير خليفة." He said, if you take one single dirham from the people and you put it in a place that it doesn't deserve, then you are a king and not a khalifa. And Umar radiallahu anh, he began to cry hearing that, fearing the accountability. This was the example of Umar radiallahu anh. The last thing I wanted to say, he established a system of shura, consulting people, hearing the voices of the people. And that's something that really resonates in today's times. All this talk of democracy and the voice of the people. Umar radiallahu anhu, he established that. He established a system, amruhum shura bainahum, as the Quran says. And he made it a point of consulting people regularly. And you can read the books of history, how he consulted people. And the amazing thing is, he didn't just consult normal people. He consulted those people who didn't have a voice. So he went to women in particular, and he consulted how many policies were established in the Islamic State that became part of our Sharia because Umar asked women about their opinion on matters. And we need to ask ourselves around the world, in our masajids, in our communities, and the boards of these organizations, how many of us consult women? Umar radiallahu anhu, he wasn't afraid to consult women. Not only that, he consulted the youth. He wasn't afraid to consult the young people. How many of the boards of masajid have youth on the board? Or they ask the young people their opinion. So much so that Imam al-Zuhri, one of the scholars, he said something beautiful. He said to his young students one time, he had some young students, and he said, لا تحتقروا أنفسكم لحداثة أسنانكم. He said, don't ever think of yourselves little. Don't ever belittle yourselves because of your young ages. فإن عمر ibn al Khattab كان إذا نزل به الأمر المعضل دعا الفتيان فاستشارهم يتبع حدة عقولهم. He said whenever things got difficult for Umar ibn al Khattab, he would gather all the young people around him and he would consult them, relying on the sharpness of their minds. So brothers and sisters, no time can do justice to a great man like Umar ibn al Khattab, who was the embodiment of strength, whose name was synonymous with justice, who shaped the modern Muslim world in the way that we know it in so many ways, who brought accountability to government, who gave voice to the voiceless and power to the powerless. So I'll close with some verses that one of the poets said about Umar ibn al Khattab, talking about the transition from one Khalifa to the next, and that'll lead us into the next talk. لما قضى صديق أحمد نحبه دفع الخلافة للإمام الثاني. He said when Siddiq, this is the first Khalifa, he neared the end of his life, he passed the baton to the second Imam. أعني به الفاروق فرق عنوة بالسيف بين الكفر والإيمان. And he said that second Imam was Al-Faruq, the one who distinguished between truth and falsehood with his sword. هو أظهر الإسلام بعد خفائه ومحى الظلام وباح بالكتمان. He is the one who made Islam open after it had been hidden, and he wiped out the darkness and he made it go away forever. ومضى وخلى الأمر شورى بينهم في الأمر فاجتمعوا على عثمان. And he lived his life consulting people, hearing their voices, and then he passed the baton to Uthman ibn Affan radiyallahu anhuma. Wa jazakumullahu khairan wa assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullah.